On the morning of May 29, 1944, 500 miles west of the Azores in the mid-Atlantic, Captain Lieutenant Detlev Krankenhagen commanded U-549 from 600 feet below the surface. A depth he believed meant safety. His Type 9 C-40 submarine had torpedoed and sunk the American escort carrier Block Island less than an hour before sunset. The hunter had become the hunted. Through the hydrophones, Krankenhagen and his crew listened to the propeller sounds of American destroyer escorts searching above. The sound was methodical, persistent. They had survived this before. The standard pattern of depth charge attacks that German commanders had learned to evade through 3 years of brutal experience in the Atlantic. Dive to maximum depth, go silent, wait for the attackers to lose sonar contact in the blind spot directly beneath their hulls, execute a sharp course change in those precious seconds when the escorts passed overhead and dropped their charges, then endure the concussive blasts that might crack gauges and shatter light bulbs, but rarely penetrated the pressure hull at this depth. This was doctrine. This was knowledge bought with blood and confirmed through hundreds of successful evasions. This was how German submariners stayed alive, what Krankenhagen could not know. What no German commander fully understood in May of 1944 was that the rules of this deadly game had fundamentally changed. The destroyer escort USS Eugene E. Elmore maintained perfect sonar contact with U-549 despite the depth. Her Type 144 sonar could detect submarines at ranges up to 3,000 yards under ideal conditions, and these conditions were nearly perfect. More critically, mounted on Elmore's foredeck sat a weapons system that German naval intelligence had only begun to catalogue: the Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. A device so conceptually different from everything German crews had trained to survive that its name would become, in the final year of the war, a synonym for sudden death without warning. At approximately 2100 hours, Elmore's commanding officer ordered his first attack run. 24 projectiles launched forward in rapid succession, all discharged in under 2 seconds. Each bomb was 7 inches in diameter, weighed 65 pounds and carried 35 pounds of Torpex explosive. They arced through the darkness and splashed into the Atlantic in a circular pattern 200 yards ahead of Elmore's bow. The projectiles sank at 23.5 feet per second. At U-549's depth of 600 feet, they would arrive in approximately half a minute. Unlike depth charges that exploded at preset depths whether they hit anything or not, these bombs detonated only on contact. The first salvo missed, sinking silently past the submarine to the ocean floor. Krankenhagen likely believed he had survived the attack. The ocean was silent above him. No explosions. Perhaps the Americans had lost contact. Perhaps they had given up. Elmore maintained sonar contact. The destroyer escort turned for a second pass. 3 minutes to reload. Another 24 projectiles launched. 30 seconds after they entered the water, 3 underwater explosions echoed through Elmore's sonar receivers. 3 direct hits on the pressure hull. 4 minutes later, sonar operators detected a different sound, a heavy, crushing explosion. U-549 had imploded as she sank past her crush depth, killing all 55 men aboard instantly. From the moment Elmore fired her second salvo to the submarine's destruction, approximately 4.5 minutes, the crew of U-549 had executed their evasion doctrine correctly. Every procedure, every action, every decision their training prescribed. It was not enough. The weapon that killed them operated on principles their training had never addressed, because the weapon had not existed when their training was written. To understand what Hedgehog meant to German submarine crews, you first need to understand what those men believed about their chances of survival before this technology appeared. By 1943, German submariners operated under no illusions about the danger they faced. The Battle of the Atlantic had claimed thousands of their comrades, but they also possessed hard-won tactical knowledge that offered genuine hope for survival, and that distinction between dangerous and certain death was everything. German U-boat doctrine, refined through brutal experience since 1939, centered on exploiting a fundamental weakness in Allied anti-submarine warfare: the sonar blind spot. British ASDIC and American sonar systems transmitted sound pulses that bounced off submerged targets, and returned as echoes. The technology worked reasonably well at medium ranges, allowing escort vessels to detect submarines and track their movements. But at close range, the physics of underwater sound detection created a critical vulnerability. As an escort vessel closed to attack, the time between the transmitted pulse and returning echo shortened progressively. Eventually, at ranges typically under 200 yards, the outgoing pulse and returning echo merged. The submarine effectively vanished from sonar at precisely the moment when accurate weapon placement mattered most. This blind spot extended directly beneath the attacking ship, creating a zone where the submarine could maneuver undetected while the escort completed its attack run. German commanders learned to exploit this weakness with practiced precision. As the escort vessel passed overhead to drop depth charges, the submarine would execute sharp changes in direction and speed. The escort, temporarily blind, dropped its charges based on the submarine's last known position, a position that might be 50 or 100 yards from where the submarine had maneuvered during those critical seconds. The charges would detonate in empty water. The submarine would run clear. The attack would fail. Depth charges themselves imposed further limitations that worked in the submarine's favor. The Mark VI and Mark VII depth charges used by Allied forces through 1943 sank at approximately 8 to 9 feet per second. For a submarine at 300 feet depth, not even the maximum diving depth of most U-boats, the charges required over 30 seconds to reach attack depth after entering the water. During that half minute, while the escort remained blind and the charges slowly descended, the submarine's captain could order changes in depth, speed, and heading that moved his boat well outside the lethal radius. The explosives in depth charges detonated at preset depths using hydrostatic fuses, regardless of whether they were near the target. This created massive underwater explosions that temporarily disrupted sonar performance for both the attacker and other escorts in the vicinity. The turbulence and noise from these explosions could persist for 15 minutes or longer, during which time the submarine might escape entirely, running silent at a different depth and heading than the escorts expected. German submarine construction emphasized structural strength specifically to survive depth charge attacks. The pressure hull of a Type 7C U-boat, the most common variant, could theoretically withstand pressures at depths approaching 750 feet. More importantly, the hull could absorb substantial shock damage from depth charges exploding nearby without catastrophic failure. Multiple charges had to detonate within 10 to 20 feet of the hull to inflict fatal damage, at preset depths, after sinking for 30+ seconds. While the target was maneuvering through an escort's blind spot, statistics validated this relative survivability. British records documented that during World War II, out of 5,174 depth charge attacks, only 85.5 resulted in confirmed U-boat kills, a success ratio of approximately 1 in 60. Many U-boats survived hundreds of depth charges during their operational careers. U-427 famously endured 678 depth charges dropped against it in April of 1945 before finally escaping. While such extreme cases were exceptional, they reinforced the belief among German submariners that depth charge attacks, however terrifying, were survivable if the crew maintained discipline and the captain executed proper evasive tactics. May of 1943, Black May, as German submariners came to call it, had been a turning point. In that single month, Allied forces sank 41 U-boats, losses that exceeded the rate at which German shipyards could build replacements. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz temporarily withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic convoy routes, acknowledging that the balance had shifted against Germany. Yet even as the strategic situation deteriorated, individual U-boat commanders retained tactical options. They could still dive deep, exploit the sonar blind spot, and maneuver during the critical seconds when escorts were dropping depth charges. The Atlantic remained a vast space where a skilled captain might find opportunities to escape or hide. The psychological framework that sustained German U-boat crews through their missions rested on this foundation of tactical knowledge. They accepted that their work was extraordinarily dangerous. By war's end, approximately 28,000 of the 40,000 men who served in U-boats would die, a casualty rate exceeding 70%. But danger, and certain death were not identical concepts. Skill mattered. Experience mattered. Understanding your enemy's weapons and their limitations mattered. A competent captain who knew his boat and executed proper tactics could bring his crew home. Many had done so repeatedly. The Hedgehog anti-submarine projector entered service with British escort vessels in 1942. Its early results were profoundly disappointing. Success rates of approximately 5% barely exceeded those achieved by depth charges. Royal Navy captains launched Hedgehog attacks so infrequently in early 1943 that the Admiralty issued a directive ordering commanders to report specifically why they had chosen not to use the weapon when engaging submerged contacts. The implication was clear. Something conceptually correct was failing operationally. The problem was not the weapon. The problem was that nobody fully understood yet how to use it. Commander Charles Goodeve of the Royal Navy had conceived the forward-throwing mortar concept in the spring of 1940. He recognized that the fundamental problem with depth charges was not their explosive power, but their tactical deployment. By the time depth charges could be dropped, the attacking ship had passed over the target. Sonar had lost contact. The submarine was maneuvering blind. The solution was geometrically obvious once stated. The weapon needed to fire forward while the submarine was still visible to sonar, while contact was maintained, before the escort passed overhead and created the blind spot. The technical challenge was formidable. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker had developed spigot mortar technology between the wars. Goodeve's team adapted it for naval use, then spent months solving problems that had defeated earlier attempts. They placed 35 pounds of Torpex explosive in each projectile with the contact fuse mounted in the nose. Torpex was approximately 50% more powerful than TNT. The tubular tail provided stability during flight and descent. The contact fuse mechanism required extraordinary precision engineering. It had to withstand the violent shock of hitting the water at terminal velocity without premature detonation. Once submerged, a small propeller blade mounted on the nose began rotating in the water flow. After approximately 50 feet of descent, the fuse armed itself. Upon striking a solid surface harder than ocean floor sediment, a mechanical trigger would fire the detonator instantaneously. The pattern of projectile dispersal required mathematical optimization. Using a device resembling a roulette wheel with a scale model submarine placed at various positions, engineers spent days launching miniature projectiles at the model and recording thousands of impacts. They analyzed which projectile angles and spacing patterns provided the highest probability of hitting a submarine, attempting various evasive maneuvers. The final pattern, 130 feet in diameter with projectiles spaced approximately 18 feet apart, represented the statistical optimum for catching a submarine, even if it maneuvered during the brief seconds between projectile launch and water impact. Determining the optimal explosive charge weight involved research that bordered on espionage. German U-boat construction details remained classified. Goodeve's team discovered an Italian naval magazine that had published photographs of German submarine production. One image showed a worker standing on a U-boat's pressure hull while performing maintenance work on the outer casing deck. By carefully measuring the worker's apparent leg length in the photograph and calculating the perspective distortion, engineers estimated the vertical distance between the pressure hull and outer casing. Critical information for determining whether 35 pounds of Torpex would penetrate both layers. The weapon's technical principle addressed the blind spot problem at its root. 24 spigot mortars arranged in 4 rows of 6, mounted on a steel cradle on the foredeck. The spigots were angled, so projectiles would land in a circular pattern approximately 130 feet in diameter, about 200 yards ahead of the firing ship's position. Forward firing was the crucial innovation. Unlike depth charges, which had to be dropped from the stern after the attacking ship passed over the target, Hedgehog projectiles were launched ahead, while the submarine remained detectable by sonar. The captain could maintain sonar contact throughout the attack and even adjust course to compensate if the submarine changed position between the moment of firing and the arrival of the projectiles. At 23.5 feet per second, the projectiles reached 200 feet depth in under 9 seconds. For a submarine at operational depth of 300 feet, the time from water entry to arrival was approximately 13 seconds. Compared to the 30-plus seconds required for Mark VI depth charges to reach the same depth, Hedgehog cut reaction time by more than half. 13 seconds was not enough time for a submarine captain to receive a report, process it, issue an order, and have that order executed. The physics had compressed the reaction window below the threshold where human decision-making could effectively respond. Most significantly, a single direct hit was typically sufficient to sink a U-boat. The contact detonation meant no water cushion existed to dissipate the explosive force. 35 pounds of Torpex exploding directly against the pressure hull would rupture it catastrophically. The distance that had previously allowed submarines to survive near misses was eliminated. There were no near misses. There were hits that killed and misses that were completely silent. That silence was perhaps the most psychologically significant feature of the weapon. Depth charge attacks always produced massive explosions visible from the surface, great geysers of water erupting regardless of whether the charges hit anything. This visual and auditory feedback provided crews with a sense of accomplishment and gave escort commanders confidence they were damaging the enemy, even when the submarine escaped undamaged. For submarine crews below, the explosions were terrifying, but they were also measurable. You could count them, track whether they were getting closer or farther away, calculate whether the pattern was moving off your position, make decisions based on what you were hearing. Hedgehog's silence when it missed removed all of this. Inside a submarine under Hedgehog attack, 24 projectiles entering the water produced 24 small splashes above. Then nothing. The silence was not the comforting silence of an attack that had missed and ended. It was the silence of a weapon that had missed this time and whose crew was already reloading for another pass, maintaining perfect sonar contact throughout. And critically, that silence meant the escort sonar remained fully functional. Depth charge explosions disrupted sonar performance for 15 minutes or longer, forcing escorts to reacquire the submarine from scratch. Every failed depth charge attack gave the submarine a 15-minute window to run. Failed Hedgehog attacks gave the submarine nothing. The sonar continued pinging. The contact remained. The escort turned for another run, more informed than before. By late 1943 and into 1944, Allied anti-submarine forces resolved the early problems that had plagued Hedgehog deployment. Better training taught crews how to aim the weapon more effectively. The introduction of combat information, centers aboard escort vessels integrated sonar data with fire control systems, allowing more accurate attacks. Previously, the captain commanded from the bridge, while sonar operators worked in a separate compartment, calling out bearing and range information that the captain had to mentally integrate with ship's heading and speed to determine attack geometry. The Combat Information Center consolidated all tactical information in a single location. Sonar returns appeared on displays that overlaid the ship's position and heading. The fire control system integrated directly with sonar tracking, calculating firing solutions that accounted for the submarine's depth, speed, and heading along with the attack ship's course and the projectile's ballistic trajectory. The statistics began reflecting these improvements. By the end of the war, Hedgehog attacks achieved success rates of approximately 20%. One submarine sunk for every 5 attacks. In comparison, depth charges never achieved better than one success in 80 attacks. Out of 268 Hedgehog attacks documented by British forces, 47 resulted in confirmed submarine kills, a ratio dramatically better than conventional depth charging. American forces adopted Hedgehog through reverse Lend-Lease in late 1942. USS England demonstrated what a well-trained crew with good sonar integration could accomplish. Between May 14th and May 26th of 1944, England sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days. Row 105, Row 108, Row 106, Row 104, Row 116, and Row 107, all using Hedgehog. A record that had no precedent in the history of anti-submarine warfare and would have none afterward. 11 of the last 16 U-boat sinkings achieved by United States Navy destroyers and destroyer escorts in World War II involved Hedgehog projectiles. For German U-boat commanders who survived their encounters and returned to base, The reports they filed painted an increasingly grim picture that German naval intelligence struggled to interpret. The standard evasion tactics that had kept submarines alive through 4 years of brutal attrition were failing against opponents that maintained sonar contact at depths previously considered safe. Attacks came from ahead rather than directly overhead, arriving before the submarine could maneuver. The explosions, when they came, struck directly against the hull rather than detonating nearby. The graduated damage model, where submarines might survive near misses and accumulate survivable damage over extended attacks, had been replaced by something binary. Hit and the submarine sank, miss and nothing happened at all. German naval intelligence understood that forward-firing anti-submarine weapons with contact fuses existed. They did not understand the full tactical picture. How Hedgehog eliminated the blind spot entirely, how the forward-firing maintained sonar contact throughout the attack, how the rapid sink rate compressed reaction time to seconds, how the silence of missed attacks allowed multiple attack runs without the 15-minute sonar disruption that depth charges created. This comprehensive understanding came too slowly to affect German tactics or training meaningfully. By the time Kriegsmarine analysts fully grasped the implications, Germany's submarine force had been decimated beyond any possibility of recovery. Captain Lieutenant Helmut Sommer commanded U-853 during a patrol off the American East Coast in the final weeks of the European War. His submarine had survived a previous attack by British aircraft in May of 1944. That survival had been earned through the tactical knowledge that German submariners had refined through years of combat. On May 5, 1945, Grand Admiral Dönitz transmitted orders to all U-boats directing them to cease offensive operations. Germany's surrender was imminent. On May 6, U-853 torpedoed and sank the American collier SS Black Point off Point Judith, Rhode Island, the last merchant vessel sunk by German U-boat action in American waters. Whether Sommer received Dönitz's ceasefire order or chose to ignore it remains disputed by historians. The response to his attack was immediate and overwhelming. American destroyer escorts USS Atherton and USS Moberly, along with several other vessels, converged on the attack location. Lieutenant Commander Louis Eislin commanded Atherton, which made initial sonar contact with the submarine at approximately 8:30 in the evening. The hunt lasted through the night and into the early morning hours of May 7th. Atherton dropped 13 magnetic depth charges in the initial attacks. One exploded, but the crew could not determine whether it struck the submarine or one of the numerous shipwrecks littering the shallow waters off Rhode Island. Sommer maneuvered his boat through the turbulence. The submarine was detected again at approximately 11:43 that night, 4,000 yards east of its previous position, lying dead in the water, with propellers silent at approximately 100 feet depth. The temperature inside U-853 would have been rising in the hot, fetid air. Light bulbs shattered by the concussive force of near-miss depth charges. Gauge faces cracked. Small leaks might have appeared in hull fittings stressed by repeated shock. The crew maintained silence, knowing that any noise might betray their position to the hunting escorts above. They had survived attacks before. Sommer understood the doctrine. Wait for the escorts to lose contact in the blind spot. Maneuver during the critical seconds when depth charges descended. But the escorts maintained perfect sonar contact. At approximately 2 in the morning on May 7th, Moberly executed a Hedgehog attack run. The projectiles entered the water in their characteristic circular pattern. Most sank silently to the bottom. 3 struck U-853's pressure hull directly. The 35-pound Torpex charges detonated on contact. What happened next depended on where exactly those 3 projectiles struck. If they penetrated the pressure hull cleanly, the crew died instantly as seawater under tremendous pressure flooded into the submarine's compartments with explosive force. The air pressure inside would have compressed violently, creating temperatures high enough to ignite anything combustible. Death would have come in less than a second for men near the impact points, perhaps slightly longer for those in other compartments, as the ocean claimed the entire vessel. If the projectiles struck the outer casing and ruptured ballast tanks without immediately breaching the pressure hull, Sommer and his crew endured a different horror. They would have known immediately that the submarine was mortally damaged. The boat would have begun sinking with the crew powerless to arrest the descent. At 100 feet depth when the attack occurred, They had perhaps 4 minutes before the submarine reached crush depth, somewhere beyond 700 feet. 4 minutes of knowing exactly what was coming as the pressure hull groaned under increasing stress. Small leaks becoming jets of water under impossible pressure, the boat tilting at steeper angles as it plummeted into darkness. Then the final moment. A sound described by sonar operators as a heavy, crushing explosion. As the pressure hull imploded, the entire structure collapsing inward in a fraction of a second under millions of pounds of force. No one aboard U-853 survived. All 55 men died. Germany surrendered less than 24 hours later. Operation Teardrop in April and May of 1945 demonstrated the full integration of Allied anti-submarine capabilities against a concentrated German submarine threat. Intelligence indicated that Germany had dispatched a group of Type 9 U-boats designated Gruppe Seewolf toward the American East Coast, possibly armed with rocket weapons capable of striking American cities. The threat prompted the United States Navy to organize 2 large barrier forces across the mid-Atlantic. The Germans remained unaware that their Enigma codes had been comprehensively broken. They continued transmitting detailed operational orders that Allied codebreakers read almost as quickly as the intended German recipients. The submarines were sailing into positions that Allied commanders had selected in advance. U-1235 became the first casualty. Just before midnight on April 15th, USS Stanton detected the submarine on radar as it attempted to transit the barrier on the surface. Stanton attacked with Hedgehog. The submarine submerged and initially escaped. Assisted by USS Frost, Stanton regained sonar contact and made 3 additional Hedgehog attacks over the following hours. The third attack sank U-1235 with the loss of her entire crew of 56 men. 40 minutes later, and only 1.5 nautical miles from U-1235's last position, Frost detected another submarine on radar. This was U-880, which had apparently closed on the destroyer escorts while they were prosecuting U-1235. Frost, Stanton, and USS Hughes tracked U-880 through the remainder of the night. Multiple Hedgehog attacks followed. Stanton sank the submarine at approximately 4 in the morning, with no survivors from her crew of 52 men. Both submarines suffered massive explosions far larger than 35 pounds of Torpex should have produced. American commanders feared the submarines were carrying rockets, as intelligence suggested. Later analysis determined that the Hedgehog strikes had detonated the submarine's own torpedo warheads, or compressed air flasks. The secondary explosions were the submarine's own ordnance destroying them from inside. USS Neil A. Scott and USS Carter sank U-518 just before midnight on April 22nd using coordinated Hedgehog attacks. No one from the crew of 55 survived. On April 24th, USS Flaherty severely damaged U-546 with a Hedgehog salvo after nearly 10 hours of continuous hunting. The submarine surfaced, but sank after Flaherty and 3 other destroyer escorts engaged it with deck guns. Captain Lieutenant Paul Just and 32 crewmen survived and were taken prisoner. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone analyzing the results. U-boats that would have survived or escaped depth charge attacks were being destroyed rapidly once Hedgehog-equipped escorts established sonar contact. The weapon eliminated the blind spot that German tactical doctrine depended upon. The rapid sink rate gave U-boat commanders no time to execute the evasive maneuvers that had saved submarines from depth charges. The contact fuses meant that any explosion indicated a hit, and hits were almost invariably fatal. Herbert Werner, who commanded several U-boats and survived the war, described the atmosphere in his memoir titled Iron Coffins, a title that captured the claustrophobic horror of submarine service during this period. He wrote of men going to sea knowing they would probably not return, of silent meals before departure, where submariners avoided discussing the future because acknowledging it seemed like inviting fate. He described the sounds of depth charge attacks, the waiting in darkness and silence, while water dripped from stressed hull fittings and men counted the seconds between explosions, calculating whether the pattern was moving closer or farther away. But Werner also noted that attacks which came without warning, no sound of approaching propellers, no gradual intensification of ASDIC pings, were the ones that terrified crews most completely. The submarine might be running silent at depth when suddenly the hull would ring with the impact of projectiles striking directly, followed instantaneously by catastrophic detonation. No time to brace for impact, no opportunity for evasive action, no gradual build-up of tension that at least gave crews the illusion of participation in their own survival. Just sudden violence and death, or for the fortunate few in boats that survived damaged, the knowledge that next time they might not be so lucky. The psychological dimension was as corrosive as the physical losses. German U-boat doctrine had always emphasized that skill and tactical knowledge could offset Allied numerical and technological advantages. Experienced commanders who understood their boats and executed proper evasion techniques could survive and complete their missions. This belief system, while never guaranteeing survival, provided a framework that made the work psychologically sustainable. Men could convince themselves that their fate remained partially in their own hands, that competence and courage mattered, that the knowledge they had accumulated through years of combat had value. Hedgehog demolished that framework by removing the tactical variables upon which German doctrine depended. The weapon attacked from ahead while the submarine remained under continuous sonar observation, eliminating the blind spot that evasion tactics exploited. The projectiles arrived in seconds, rather than the half-minute or more that depth charges required, compressing reaction time below the threshold where human decision-making could effectively respond. The contact detonation meant a single hit was fatal, removing the graduated damage model where submarines might survive near misses and accumulate manageable damage over extended attacks. Surviving U-boat commanders reported a psychological shift among crews during the final year of the war. The grim determination that had characterized earlier periods gave way to something approaching fatalism. Men understood intellectually that they were likely sailing to their deaths. The operational statistics made this unavoidable. New submarines departing on their first patrol had survival probabilities measured in single-digit percentages. Experienced boats and crews fared only marginally better, as Allied anti-submarine capabilities continued improving, while German resources and training standards deteriorated. The statistical record quantifies this transformation in terms that require no interpretation. During World War II, British forces conducted 5,174 depth charge attacks that resulted in 85.5 confirmed submarine kills, a success ratio of approximately 1 in 60 attacks. In comparison, the Hedgehog system achieved 268 attacks, resulting in 47 kills, a ratio of approximately 1 in 5.7 attacks. By the final year of the war, that ratio improved further to approximately 1 kill for every 5 attacks, a 20-fold improvement over conventional depth charging. 1 kill for every 5 attacks, compared to 1 kill for every 60 depth charge attacks. Those numbers represent not just more efficient weapons, but a fundamentally different category of combat. The tactical environment that German submariners had learned to navigate had been replaced by one in which their navigation skills were irrelevant. Commander Charles Goodeve's ungainly device with its peculiar name had evolved into the most lethal anti-submarine weapon system of the war. The development process illustrated the importance of persistence in the face of early failure. Initial Hedgehog deployments had achieved disappointing results that might have justified abandoning the weapon entirely. Success rates barely exceeded those of depth charges. Crews distrusted the system. Technical problems plagued operations. A less determined organization might have concluded the weapon was fundamentally flawed and returned to established methods. Instead, British leadership analyzed the problems systematically, identified that most difficulties stemmed from inadequate training and poor integration with sonar systems, rather than inherent design flaws, and invested resources in comprehensive crew education programs that transformed performance. The retraining was conducted ship by ship at Londonderry, where most Atlantic escort vessels based their operations. Officers from the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development traveled from vessel to vessel explaining the weapon's technical principles and, more critically, presenting case studies of successful Hedgehog attacks that demonstrated its lethal effectiveness when properly employed. The training emphasized several points that crews had misunderstood. The silence of a missed attack was actually a tactical advantage, not a deficiency. Depth charge explosions obscured sonar returns for 15 minutes or longer, forcing escorts to reacquire the submarine from scratch. Hedgehog's silence meant continuous sonar tracking throughout multiple attack runs, dramatically increasing the probability that subsequent salvos would strike the target. The circular pattern was designed specifically to account for submarine evasion during the projectile's descent time. Any explosion indicated a direct hit and almost certainly meant a kill, unlike depth charges which might explode near a submarine without inflicting fatal damage. The technical principle that Hedgehog embodied, employ weapons while maintaining sensor contact with the target, rather than after losing contact, became fundamental to modern anti-submarine warfare. Post-war developments, including the British Squid and Limbo mortar systems, and eventually acoustic homing torpedoes like the American Mark 46, all embodied this same concept. Maintain contact while the target remains under observation. Eliminate the blind time that allows evasion. Return now to that morning of May 29, 1944. Captain Lieutenant Detlev Krankenhagen commanded a modern submarine crewed by trained sailors. He understood anti-submarine warfare tactics that German forces had refined through 4 years of brutal experience. He executed the evasion procedures that doctrine prescribed: dive deep, go silent, wait for the blind spot, maneuver when the escort passes overhead. Every decision he made was correct according to the knowledge available to him. It was not enough. The escort maintained sonar contact at depths German doctrine considered safe. The attack came from ahead rather than from directly overhead. The projectiles arrived in seconds rather than the half-minute the depth charges required. When they struck, death followed instantaneously, with no opportunity for damage control, no possibility of survival, no chance to surface and abandon ship. German U-boat crews were not defeated because they lacked courage or skill. They lost because the tactical paradigm within which their courage and skill operated had been fundamentally altered by technological and doctrinal changes they could neither predict nor counter in time. The knowledge that had kept them alive, exploit the blind spot, maneuver during descent time, survive through structural strength and evasion, became obsolete, transformed from survival wisdom to lethal misconception. The psychological dimension distinguishes this from a simple story of technological advancement. German submariners did not face overwhelming force that crushed them through sheer material superiority. They confronted a situation where the assumptions underlying their tactical doctrine had been invalidated. They were practicing tactics designed for an operational environment that no longer existed, unaware that the rules had changed until the moment those new rules killed them. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout military history. Cavalry charges persisting into the era of machine guns, fortress cities falling to artillery that could breach walls previously considered impregnable, battleships becoming obsolete when carrier aircraft demonstrated the ability to strike from beyond visual range. In each case, forces continued to employ tactics that had worked previously, while remaining unaware that those tactics had been countered. The tactics were not merely less effective, they were actively dangerous. They directed the men employing them toward the assumptions that the enemy had specifically built the new weapon to defeat. The Hedgehog weapon system achieved strategic impact disproportionate to its mechanical simplicity because it attacked the core assumptions of German anti-submarine evasion doctrine. By eliminating the blind spot, compressing reaction time to seconds, and requiring only a single contact hit to achieve a kill, it removed every margin that German tactical skill had exploited. A U-boat commander could execute perfect evasion maneuvers according to doctrine and still die, because that doctrine no longer applied to the weapons being employed against him. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boats during World War II, approximately 28,000 died, a loss rate exceeding 70%. No other branch of any military service in any nation suffered comparable casualties. The introduction of Hedgehog and other improved anti-submarine technologies contributed significantly to this carnage during the war's final 18 months. Men died partly because their leadership could not or would not accept that the tactical balance had shifted irreversibly. They died because German naval intelligence gathered information too slowly, and German training doctrine adapted too gradually to the changing operational environment. They died because the institutional machinery of the Kriegsmarine continued dispatching submarines on missions whose strategic value had evaporated while their costs in lives mounted catastrophically. The morning of May 29, 1944 began with Captain Lieutenant Krankenhagen believing his skill and his crew's discipline could bring them safely home. 4.5 minutes after USS Elmore's second Hedgehog salvo entered the water, U-549 ceased to exist. Between those two moments lies everything this story means. The gap between what we believe and what is true, measured in the lives of 55 men who never learned the difference. If this story changed how you think about the Battle of the Atlantic, hit the like button right now. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who have never heard Krankenhagen's name or understood what Hedgehog changed about submarine warfare. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because we find these buried stories every single week. Stories about the mechanics of weapons that changed wars. Stories about the men who died because their doctrine was correct for a world that no longer existed. Stories about the gap between what soldiers believed about their chances and what was true. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Atlantic on either side. Tell us what surprised you most about how Hedgehog worked and what it did to the assumptions German submariners had spent 4 years building. This community spans the entire world. You're not just watching, you're part of keeping these stories alive. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure that Commander Charles Goodeve, who designed a spigot mortar in a makeshift office nicknamed the Wheezers and Dodgers, and whose device killed the assumptions that had kept German submariners alive, is remembered as what he was. Not just an engineer, the man whose ungainly device, with its peculiar name, removed the one thing that skilled men in pressure hulls 600 feet below the Atlantic had always been able to count on. The blind spot was gone. 4.5 minutes after Elmore's second salvo proved it. And now, because you watched this, you know exactly how it worked and what it cost the men who learned that lesson last.